Today we're going to take a look at what it takes to create a 4x4 space in a garage for a welding area. There's a lot of things to consider and a lot of things that have to be taken into account. One of which is space in a wood shop. Welcome to Making the Space. My name is Pat Schuff. Today we will be talking about home welding shops versus a welding shop membership. There are benefits to both and disadvantages to both. We're going to focus on capital costs, what tools are needed, and operational costs of maintaining and keeping a system going. If we do a quick survey of YouTube channels that contain home welding shops, Make Something with David does a fairly good home workshop. Talks about the gear needed and is pretty good about it. The Essential Craftsman with Nate goes a little bit more in depth as to specific tools that are needed, how to get a very beginner shop done. But the one I found most interesting was the Journeyman YouTube channel with David, talking about safety in a garage and how to make a really, really small shop. So to get a good perspective of what equipment is needed, let's look at a public lab, TXRX Labs, and see how they've set up their welding shop with what equipment's needed and what equipment they use. Okay, this is the welding lab at TXRX. It's at the end of the hallway. There's not much around here. As you walk in, there is a notice saying safety glasses and safety shoes are required. This is the welding lab with safety glasses and hearing protection outside the door. As we walk in, a few things to note. There is a nice bandsaw here to do cutting work on metal. This is a fairly large industrial metal cutter. You do have to be certified to use it, but it's pretty straightforward. There are also chop saws, which have a place on the floor next to all the gas storage. And then there are tables that are set up for welding. Each of the tables has an associated welder with it. There's a high-powered welder and a standard welder with the proper gas, and they're on wheels and sleds. There are partitions between the tables, so that if somebody's working in multiple days, there are multiple things that can be done. I typically use the small miller. It has settings for the wire speed and settings for the voltage that's used. And if you flip open the side panel here, it has the specifications on all of the wire speeds based on the thickness of the material that you're using. There's a third bay for welding so that 3 people can work at the same time. So, fairly large area. A lot of space, a lot of equipment that's used. There are power lines and compressed gas lines that come down from the ceiling. Notice there are power lines per station. So, the minimum requirement that's needed is a power connection at the wall to plug in the 220 connector for each of the welding machines, and then a 110 at the other end to plug in the chop equipment. Now, also in this lab is equipment that can be checked out and used. Welding masks, tape measures, diagonal cutters, a variety of clamps that can be used to clamp things down, corner brackets to create corner angles, levels. If you're doing TIG welding, there is a supply of TIG welding here, but it's encouraged that you bring your own. There are hammers and grinders. Notice there are an assortment of grinders. Typically, there are 2 types of grinders that are used. There's a cut, which allows you to cut the steel at various points, and then there is a variety of different buffing pads and sanding pads to allow you to clean things up. No, there are also some special ones here that, this one says for aluminum, so this shouldn't be used on steel, but for aluminum, for stainless steel, for a variety of things like that. And then if you need welding gloves, there are gloves here that you can use, and wire brushes to clean up a variety of things. For the most part, I typically bring my own cutters, just because I use my own. I typically do not bring my own clamps because they're heavy, but I do have to bring my own tips. There are some tips in tool drawers and a variety of tools here, but for the most part, the tips that are needed, you're supplying your own, because these wear down pretty quickly and get scored pretty easily. Notice that one is kind of corroded easily. This one looks relatively new. I've got a pack of these in my pack, as well as the other component needed for the arc welder. Majority of time, this area is empty. There aren't many people using it on an hour-by-hour basis. However, this is one of the most profitable sections for classes because people tend to spend a lot of money to get certified in welding. So let's go through a breakdown of parts and components. A welding table is a basic essential. You have to have something that's metallic to attach to, ground the welding machine to, and ground the materials that you're welding so that you can get a good weld. A welding table can cost anywhere from $100 to $300. The ones that are used at TXRX are home built and custom, so that they're welded on site. Partitions are needed for shop safety to keep people walking by from seeing the actual arcing and to keep debris from flying between two workstations. In a small garage, it's essential to keep sparks away from flammable materials and things that are stored on the floor. Welders at places like Northern Tool and Harbor Freight, but I recommend getting a industrial strength welder. If you're planning on using it more than a few times, it's important. You also need a cart to move it around and to place the oxygen bottles onto. Being able to roll things around is important, and it's critical to get something that works properly. Don't scrimp on this. You're looking at about $1,700 to $2,000 for a fairly decent welder. For power or special purpose welders like a TIG welder, typically will cost a little bit more. The one they have at TXRX is about $4,000. You don't necessarily need two, but make sure you know what you're trying to do and either buy a MIG, a TIG, or a plasma cutter, because it makes a difference which equipment you buy. So a gas bottle is usually about $100, but it's critical that you also get a good chop saw. The chop saw is your workhorse to get steel ready before you weld it. Those are about $300 to get a decent one, and the blades are not considered part of this cost, but you might have to replace a blade once a year or so. Some optional components that are needed are a bandsaw and a drill press. Without a bandsaw, it's going to be rather difficult to cut steel, but you can get by with the chop saws if you have to. A good mask is critical. Don't skimp on the mask cost. The cheaper you go, the less it works. Get a relatively high-end Lincoln one is probably a good one to go with. It will help you substantially while you're welding. So we're close to $3,000 with the basic equipment needed. Roughly you'll need about $300 more in miscellaneous equipment, things like pliers, rough squares, marking tools, angle holders that are specific to metal, measuring tools like measuring tape, and clamps. You can never have enough clamps. My estimate is about $200 to $400 in miscellaneous tools that we saw earlier in the tool storage bin. One or more grinders is also important. A standard grinder from Home Depot or Lowe's is good enough. You typically need multiple cutting wheels and multiple buffing wheels. at roughly about $200 for the combination of everything to allow you to do basic cutting, honing, and cleanup. Consumables that you'll need to get are brushes, gloves, and a variety of miscellaneous little tools. The whole concept is you've got a complete shop at this point. For a home shop, we're looking at roughly $3,300. For a lab, we're looking at roughly $21,000 to build out a 3-bay unit. This would include the higher-end TIG welder as well as a bandsaw and a few other pieces of equipment that are needed in a larger shop. One of the nice things about a lab is you can teach classes, and people will pay good money to do MIG and TIG welding. TXRX has a class for $120 for MIG welding, which is taught about once a month or every 3 weeks. TIG welding is also taught, a lot more expensive, but it tends to be full most of the time. So if you make an assumption that you can teach MIG welding to 6 students every other week and TIG welding once a month to 6 students, you've got a good cost recovery for your classes. You're looking at roughly 9 months to recover the cost of the lab investment, with headroom after you've recovered that cost for a salary to pay somebody. And it takes about 1/3 of a full-time employee to maintain the lab, to do the teaching, and to keep the welding lab operational. The final piece of the welding shop is cleanup. Notice the floors are pretty spotless, pretty clean, and welding is a relatively dirty, grungy job. The brooms and the scoop handles are here, and then a trash can is available to throw any excess materials and dust and dirt into. There's also a trash can at the other end of the hall so that this area can be kept clean and hazard-free. So hopefully this video helps you decide, do I want to build a home lab or do I want to join a lab membership if it's available? My personal choice is I'm a member of a lab because welding's a dirty job. Storing steel, having metal shavings near where my tires are for my car just don't really work. I'd much rather spend $1,000 a year just to join a metal shop than spend $3,000 to build a metal shop in my house and then have to worry about constant cleanup, constant maintenance, potential damage to the tires of my car, storing metal on site. I feel much more comfortable buying steel, taking it straight to the lab, cutting everything up, and then bringing it home to paint. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion about how to build a home lab or how to use a commercial lab. In the next few series, we're going to actually be using the lab to build a couple items and looking at using some of the welding tools and the tools around the shop. If you like this video, click subscribe. If you don't like the video, comment. Begin a discussion as to what equipment you use that's different from what I recommend. More than happy to entertain comments.
Now back to your regularly scheduled program.
And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.